They didn't yell at me. They didn't threaten me. They just told me to stop talking about things that made them uncomfortable, to let it go, to keep it private, to think about how it looks. That's when I realized they weren't trying to protect the family. They were trying to silence me. So I made a decision they didn't expect. For a long time, I didn't see it as silencing. I thought it was compromise. That's how it usually starts. My name is Hannah Cole. I was 39, working in compliance and operations, and most of my adult life had been shaped around keeping things calm, not honest, calm. Whenever something bothered me, the response was always the same. Do we really need to talk about this? You're making it bigger than it is. Why can't you just let things go? It was never about whether I was wrong. It was about whether my honesty disrupted the peace. I learned quickly what was acceptable: agreement, silence, moving on without resolution. Every time I spoke up, the room tightened. Every time I stopped, things stayed smooth. They didn't forbid me from talking. They didn't have to. They questioned my tone, my timing, my intentions, until I started questioning myself. I began editing my words before I said them, deciding what was worth mentioning, what would cause friction, what wasn't worth the fallout. I told myself I was being mature, that this was how adults handled conflict. But over time, something shifted. I wasn't choosing peace anymore. I was choosing invisibility. The unspoken rule became clear. If I wanted to stay included, I needed to stay quiet. If I wanted harmony, I needed to absorb discomfort without naming it. And if I broke that rule, I was told I was the problem. The moment that changed everything didn't come during an argument. It came during a conversation where I finally said something I'd been holding back, something true, something uncomfortable. They didn't respond to what I said. They responded to the fact that I'd said it at all. That's when I understood. This wasn't about resolution. It was about control. And once you see that clearly, silence stops feeling like peace. It starts feeling like surrender. The moment I finally said what I'd been holding back, the reaction was immediate, not defensive, corrective. My mother leaned back slightly and said, "Why would you even bring that up now?" My father didn't look at me at all. "This doesn't need to be a whole thing," he said. "You're just stirring things up." I remember noticing how calm they sounded, like I'd broken a rule everyone else understood. I tried once, just once, to clarify. "I'm not trying to cause a problem," I said. "I just want to talk about what happened." That's when the tone changed. "You're being dramatic. You're misremembering things. You always take things the wrong way." Each sentence landed with the same message: stop talking. They weren't interested in what I was saying. They were interested in shutting it down before it went any further. I could feel the old reflex kicking in, the instinct to soften it, to backtrack, to reassure them that I wasn't accusing anyone of anything. For years, that reflex had kept things smooth. This time, I didn't give in. "I'm allowed to talk about my own experiences," I said. The room went quiet, not shocked, uncomfortable. That's when the pressure escalated. "This isn't healthy. You're dwelling. You're going to tear this family apart if you keep going." The implication was clear. If there was damage, it would be my fault. For speaking. My father finally looked at me. "If you can't let this go," he said, "maybe you need some space." It wasn't said kindly. It was said as a warning. That's when I realized something important. They weren't asking me to be reasonable. They were asking me to be quiet, so they wouldn't have to sit with discomfort. In that moment, I had a choice. I could retreat, apologize, agree to drop it, and things would go back to normal. Or I could keep going, knowing exactly what it would cost me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said, I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. That sentence changed everything. Because the moment I refused to minimize my own experience, the rules shifted. Their concern disappeared. What replaced it was control. After that conversation, nothing was said outright. And that was the point. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was strategic. Texts slowed. Calls stopped being returned. Plans were mentioned vaguely, then never confirmed. No confrontation, just withdrawal. When they did reach out, the language had changed. You seem angry lately. We're worried about you. This doesn't feel like you. They spoke like observers, not participants. Like my reaction was the issue, not what caused it. Someone suggested I should talk to someone, not supportively, clinically, as if speaking up was a symptom. They started telling other people a version of the story that didn't include my words, that I was going through something, that I was fixated on the past, that I was refusing to move on. It was easier than acknowledging what I'd said. I noticed how carefully they avoided specifics. They never repeated my actual concerns. They never quoted me directly. They just talked about my tone. That's when I understood the real consequence of speaking up. It wasn't anger, it was erasure. They tried one last tactic: reconciliation. With conditions. A call that started warmly and ended with, "But we can't keep revisiting this." An invitation paired with, "Let's just enjoy ourselves this time." Togetherness, as long as I stayed quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I just said, "I'm not going to pretend everything's fine." There was a pause, then disappointment. They framed my refusal as stubbornness, as unforgiveness, as me choosing conflict over family. But what I was actually choosing was reality. The distance that followed wasn't dramatic. It was clean. I stopped chasing conversations that required self-censorship. I stopped showing up to spaces where honesty was unwelcome. I stopped explaining myself to people who only listened when I agreed. They thought silence was the goal. They didn't realize silence was what I'd already been living in. The difference now was that it wasn't forced. By the time they realized I wasn't coming back around, the narrative had already shifted. Not because I corrected them, but because I stopped participating. Cutting contact didn't happen all at once. There was no announcement, no dramatic goodbye, no final argument that sealed it. There was just a moment where I realized I didn't owe anyone my silence anymore. For a long time, silence had been the price of belonging. If I stayed quiet, I was included. If I spoke honestly, I was difficult. Once I saw that clearly, the choice stopped being complicated. I didn't cut them off to punish them. I stepped back because every conversation came with conditions. Don't bring that up. Don't talk about it like that. Don't make people uncomfortable. That wasn't connection. That was control. Without their constant pressure, something shifted. I wasn't bracing myself before conversations anymore. I wasn't editing my thoughts mid-sentence. I wasn't replaying interactions afterward, wondering what I'd done wrong. The quiet felt different. It felt intentional. They noticed eventually. Not because they missed my voice, but because they missed the version of me who stayed agreeable, the one who swallowed discomfort to keep things smooth. They called it distance. They said I was shutting them out. But what I was really doing was choosing not to disappear anymore. I don't regret speaking up, and I don't regret what followed, because the cost of staying silent had already been too high. My parents tried to silence me. They expected compliance. They expected me to fold once things got uncomfortable. What they didn't expect was that I'd stop explaining myself entirely, that I'd choose clarity over approval, that I'd choose my voice, even if it meant standing alone. Silence used to be something they demanded. Now it's something I choose, and that's the difference between being cut off and finally being free.